found this axe on the asset store. Again, it's free, so I'm going to use this instead of a sword. Okay, so what I'll do is I'll drag in the axe from the runic axe folder, which I downloaded, and I'll make sure to place it on the camera, just like I did with the spotlight. And then I'm just going to place it slightly in front and at an angle. And our hopes is that it looks like we're holding it in our hand. Let's give that a try. So that looks pretty good. Now the axe came with a couple extra objects, so I'm going to clean it up. Now these most likely came from the Blender export, and if you're not careful that can happen sometimes. So I'm just going to drag the 3D model onto our main camera, and it'll warn me that I'm going to lose the prefab. That's okay in this case. And I'm just going to get rid of that game object, and I'm just left with the 3D model. Next, I'll load up the animation window from Window and Animation. And this might look a little bit different in Unity 4.3 if you're using that version. So what I'm going to do is go between Unity 4.3 and 4.2 and explain the differences. And since I have the hatchet selected, it shows me the different properties here which I can animate. So for example, I can make it rotate, which is what I'll do on the different axes. Now in Unity 4.3, the window looks slightly different, and we don't have the properties shown by default. So to begin, we just need to add our curves, and we can select transform and position and rotation in this case. So now in Unity 4.3, I've added both position and rotation. And you can see that it's using the dope sheet, which is the alternative view, versus curves, which is what we had in the traditional Unity 4.2 view. So if I select all the properties, you can see the view as it was in Unity 4.2. You can use either the curves or dope sheets, whichever seems easier to you. I personally prefer the new dope sheet. So the first step is to create an animation. So I will hit the record button and I'll call this axe swing. Okay, next what I'll do is I'll get into the perspective of the game, and then I'll hit record while my hatchet or axe is selected. Then I'll select the rotation axes. There we go. And I'll drop down the initial keyframes. And then since I don't want this animation to be very long, I'll go 20 steps in. So that should be a fairly quick attack animation. And then I'm just going to eye its rotation. So I know I probably want to rotate it on the Z. And on the X. So let's try that out. So I'm going to keep tweaking it. So what I'm doing now is actually holding out my hands in front of my computer, and I'm imagining that I'm swinging an axe. So I'm trying to see exactly where the end of the axe would be, where my right hand would be on the middle of the axe, and how the animation would be completed. And I'm trying to mimic that in Unity as I tweak the rotation and position. So this is looking pretty good. What I did was I shortened the animation by dragging select all of the endpoints and then just moving them to the left a bit. And I also set the play mode to ping pong, which is like a loop, but it also plays it in reverse before it replays it again. So loop, you'd have something like this where it doesn't have the retraction. And what we want is ping pong so that it goes forward and then goes back. So now just to recap in 4.3, let's say this is our animation. I don't need the rest of this animation because it's acting as a ping pong. So to mimic the 4.2 style, I would just select this end here and delete it. and now my animation is limited to that 20 frame animation we had in the original 4.2 animation. Now, how do we get the wrap mode or play mode down here as we saw in 4.2? We'd like to switch it to ping pong so that it goes back and forth. So I'll show you how to do that now. So let's start by closing the animator window or the animation window. And in 4.3, this might have added an animator component to your game object. So it might look something like this. We don't want this because this is the new animation system and we're not going to use it. So let's go ahead and remove that. And what we do want is an animation component, which is the legacy system. So let's go ahead and add that if it's not already there. So I can go to add components and animation. And it's telling me I can't add it because I already have it. In your case, you might not. So what you would end up with is an animation component like this that has 0 animations and has an empty default animation. So something like that. So now what we want to do is first add our default animation. So let's add in our axe swing or axe idle, depending which we're working on. And that's also going to add it to the animation list. So now to switch over our animation to legacy mode is a little bit tricky. So I'll show you how to do that. So let's select our animation in this case, axe idle. And this already is a legacy. So in Unity 4.3, you're probably not going to see this. So what you need to do is select debug. And in Unity 4.3, you would see an animation type of 2. So I'll show you what that looks like now. So you would see this in Unity 4.3. So now to switch back to legacy, we go back to debug and just switch animation type to 1. And now it's legacy. So if we go back to normal instead of debug, we can see the wrap mode, which I was referring to earlier, and we can switch that to ping pong. And what I've done is I've also created a new axe idle animation. And now what I'm going to do is set it up so that when I'm walking with the axe, it doesn't just stand still. It looks like it's bobbing up and down as I walk with the axe. Okay, so let's take a look at it. It's a very simple X and Y animation. And I'll show you what that looks like. It's very subtle, but as you notice, the beginning and end is very jerky. So I'm going to smooth that out. I'll right click on the keyframes and I'll select flat and I'll just do that throughout. And now it's a lot smoother. And next, I want it not to just rotate, but to bob up and down a little bit. So let's select the entire transform. We'll go to the end of our animation. And we'll add in a keyframe. We'll move it a little up. We'll add a keyframe there. And that's the wrong one, keyframe. And then we'll move down to the start of the animation. And we'll move it down a little. And we'll add another keyframe there. So now let's play that and see what it looks like. So that looks pretty good. And if you wanted, it's very subtle, but the up and down animation is a little jerky too. You could go ahead and smooth that out. So I can just zoom way in on those. Smooth that out. And that's the only one because we only moved it on the Y. So let's go ahead and play that. So that's pretty good right there.